Welcome, welcome, welcome. I know it's the weekend, and so welcome everybody to the weekend. Oh my gosh, if you got through it, you did better than I did this week, let me tell you. I don't know if it were me or if it was others, but you could have given me a nickname this week like a porcupine. I'm telling you, nobody could get close, and every time they touched me, it hurt. So I certainly commend everybody that got through that, man. I congratulate you. Listen, I jotted down a lot of notes about some personal stuff this week, and I want to make sure as we go through this, we're going to talk about recovery. And I can add my experience, strength, hope, all that good stuff and everything, but by no means do I want anybody to think that I am the foremost expert on anything. There is always a difference. There's always something else that'll work. There's always multiple ways. So don't get hung up on anything I say. If you want to call in and input or ask a question or even rebut something I got to say, by all means, the number is 888-404-1010, or you can reach out on Higher Powered FM and we'll respond to that accordingly. So to get started, I can tell you, I have been struggling with the interpersonal growth recently with regards to some of the stuff we've talked about in the past and the perseverance and the diligence and the character building. And so I hope that has helped somebody else out there. But what I want to do is bring some hope to that. I was talking to one of the guys here in the booth earlier in regards to recovery and how that touches everybody else's lives. How we all know somebody that is either struggled with or has overcome or has suffered because of some sort of addiction. And addictions don't just stop with things like drugs and alcohol. I mean, there are all kinds of stuff out there. There is the obvious ones of food and gambling, but you know there's sex and love addicts that are out there. There's identity addicts that are out there. There's shopaholics, and I know that's a coined phrase, but there are people that struggle and suffer through many myriad of different things that keep them in bondage over not being able to live a manageable life according to what their desires are. So as we go through this, I want to unfold some of that stuff and what the identity is and what the definition is. Not textbook. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a doctor. I told you guys all that stuff before. But this is practical application stuff. This is a lot of people I know that'll relate to this, and they'll be able to chime in if they feel like it. But if this helps somebody that's out there that's struggling with a spouse or with a parent or with a child or coworker, a family member, a neighbor, somebody's neighbor's kid, I mean, this touches every aspect of our lives. And when they talk about things about it being epidemic right now, it is. There was a period of a year, and that was in about 2016 for me, to be into 2015 into 2016, where I was very much involved in a recovery environment, and I knew 49 individuals. 49. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I was close and personal enough, but I knew of 49 individuals myself that died from overdoses. And so that impact is what, when they talk about it being epidemic, I think some of the statistics in the last one that I saw, because I know that they change on an annual basis, but from alcohol alone, the deaths on average per year are about 3 million people. And those are staggering numbers, because we can look at the finiteness of the fatality, but look at the lives that are damaged during that process. And this starts from childhood through adult and the whole gambit in between. And I don't want to limit this only to drugs and alcohol, because there are addictions that bind people no matter what the facet is in your life. And so for me, I can tell you, and I'm going to relate to a lot of this stuff for me, so that I want to keep it authentic. I want to keep this so that there is some transparency on this. So everybody, bear with me. But I can tell you, for me, when I was a kid, and I mean a small child, one of the things that I did is I would use substances to change how I felt, because I was always insecure. I was always afraid of the attitude that others had towards me, of whether it was I was good enough, of whether I was a part of, or whether I was going to be able to, just fit in. And so there was all of the stigma that came with that. And that's just for me. And I don't want to get into the nurture versus nature, but we may later on, because I can't tell you whether I'm a product of my environment or whether I was predispositioned to it. And there's a lot of those questions. But again, like I said a couple of weeks ago, my job in all of this, my desire in all this, is to foster the communication so that this starts to be something that people start to get help with. Because if you're not aware of what that looks like out there, if you're not aware of those things that are there to help you, then man, by all means call in, or at least reach out on social media so I can give you some resources for that. So the first thing I want, as I started to talk about, was the differences between a lot of what that is. But when we look at diseases, or excuse me, we look at addictions, they refer to that, a lot of that, as diseases. And so I know that there is the naysayers out there. They say, well, there's no way that drugs and alcohol can compare to a child who's suffering from cancer or leukemia. And of course not. And I mentioned this before, and I'm not trying to relate to that. I'm not trying to make that the same. But when we talk about the disease, and I know that we get these comic terms out there, and last year when we were on a different show, we talked about the being chronic, where you cannot stop once it's set in motion. And in the disease of, we talk about that mental obsession where all I can do is think of it, no matter how bad my consequences were the day or the week or the night before, all I now am thinking of is planning, how do I do that again? How do I make sure that I am able to go out and have a good time? I'm able to fit in or partake so that it's something I'm always obsessing over. And then once that begins, then there's always the compulsion that happens. And so overeaters will understand that when you stand there at the refrigerator, or you're in the grocery store, and you're struggling with the mental obsession over, I know this is bad for me, but I still need it, and I'm going to have it, and I want to have it, and I got to make sure I got to have something for later, and I got to make sure it's there, or once then you've started to eat, and that struggle with, I can't stop, I can't put it down. That part of it is what gets described sometimes as the disease, because it is not something that is just by choice. One of the definitions of it that we have delves into the spirituality, and I told you this show is called Higher Powered for a reason, because it is a very God-centric sentiment in all of this. And so one of the texts that's out there for recovery talks about having a spiritual malady that rests in the mind. And one of the definitions of that word malady is conflict. So I have struggled at times in my life with a conflict, a mental conflict that affects my thinking. And so what that meant to me is I would always have that conversation of, I shouldn't do this. I don't want to do this. I don't think this is a good idea. And versus, yeah, that doesn't matter. And I'm going to do this. And you know what? I'm going to do it anyway. So why do I fight myself? And here's how I can do it. It'll be different this time, and it'll be better, and I can make a difference of it. There's all kinds of different texts that are out there, and I don't want to label just one. But I can tell you, in the Bible, there's a verse in the Bible that actually says, I do those things that I don't want to do, and I don't do those good things that I do want to do. And I'm paraphrasing this, and it goes on to elaborate. It says, every time I try and do good, I see that all of that stuff that I do that I mess up is right there with me, and I continue to do that. And that's kind of the mindset that happens with somebody that's stuck in that addiction, because I can tell you, the sentiment is always, I want to be better. I don't want to do this again. I can't tell you how many times people wake up and you hear the horror stories of, oh my God, how did that happen again? I don't want to do that again. And you guys know it, because if it's somebody in your life that you're talking with or struggling with or dealing with, and I don't care if it's your kid who's in their teens that you're looking at going, God, why are you doing this? And you're seeing their change in their life. You know that struggle is because you remember who they are inside. And so that's why it gets referred to, that stuff, as far as disease, because we can't control it. I can't make that change in my life on myself simply because of self-will, self-power, or decision-making. I mean, it's never enough to affect the difference in whether I chose to or not to. And so as we get into this next part of it, where we start to talk about You know, the selfishness of that person that's struggling with that is not just something that affects themselves. You know, because that was a lot of people in all of this talk about, you know, leave me alone. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not doing anything to you. Why is this such a problem in our lives? You know, just let me just do what I want to do. But that's why they talk about this affects the whole family. And whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in the relationship, whether it's in, you know, again, with the children or the spouse or the parent, you know, that stuff is so damaging to the whole unit and everybody around you, even if it's to the neighbors next door. You know, I've heard stories where people talk about, you know, the couple that they can hear fighting next door, where he's calling her drunk and the cops are showing up at the house and they're having to explain to their kids what that's about. Because when they see them and they're happy and they're going to work and they're nice and they're standing over the fence and the hedge and everything's great, but then all of a sudden it's this chaos that's affecting everything. So we'll get into a little more detail about that here in the next few minutes. But if you got to call in, it's 888-404-1010. I'm Matt Dukes. This is Higher Powered Radio.
World, national, and local issues.
This is a short